welcome to
Dragons
Unicorns.
and Other Creative Creatures.
And this is
Rona Gofstein, and this is...
Dr. Kevin.
I managed my identity fine. Do you ever have those mornings where you're like, where am I? Who am I? What day is it?
Who are you?
I am don't know metaphysical questions this early.
You just spent the weekend at a haven for creativity.
I did.
I'm taking it.
Yes.
So share with, before you pass out.
Pass out. And with what little is left of my voice, yeah, this weekend in Boston is the sci-fi fantasy conference known as Arisia, which is strangely spelled. It's Arisia. So people pronounce it Arisia and Aricia, and I don't know if any of them are right. Yeah, I don't know if any of them are right or wrong for that matter. So it's a 4-day conference. It starts Friday and it goes through Monday. They program around the clock. So there are panels that go as late as that don't finish until nearly 1 in the morning. They do stuff on the television all night long. So you can be doing stuff without stopping for 4 days. And that's how it feels like no matter what. But it's not just, yes, it's sci-fi and fantasy, but it's also just every fandom. It's comics, it's anime, it's Doctor Who, it's Pokemon, it's board games. There's a board game room that spills out into one of the other areas that's open 24/7. There's a video game room that's open about 16 hours a day. There's an art show. And in fact, one of our previous guests, LJ Cohen, had her pottery in that. And one of our upcoming guests next month had her clothing in the art show this year. So yeah, it's creativity, it's fun, it's silly, it's exhausting, but in a good way.
So what was your favorite part of Arisa?
My favorite part of Arisia is always seeing the other women in Broad Universe. Just because we're scattered, not only all over New England, but we have people who come up from Baltimore and other parts of the area, the Mid-Atlantic. I think we even have people who've come in from Chicago for the weekend in that area. So I get to see people I haven't seen in a while for that one. And also the panels I get to be on, some of them are writing. One of them was a musical sing-along. So people I don't get to see any other time, basically, other than that weekend.
So you were on some of the panels?
Yes, I was on 5 panels.
You were on 5 panels. So now how did you get involved with Arisa?
I attended my first Arisia right after I met some of the gang and became a member of Broad Universe. And they're like, oh, there's this great sci-fi fantasy conference in January, you should come down. So I drove down from Lowell into Boston for 2 days, which is it's at the Westin, and the car show is always going on at the same time, so parking and it's craziness. And so I drove back up and down for 2 days. I thought, well, you know what, this was fun, but I definitely want to be able to spend the night. And then I told the kids about it when I got home, and they were both immediately enamored of the idea. So they've come with me every year since. So it's a family weekend for us. And the first time I was on a panel, actually, was because of Trisha Wooldridge. She had somebody back out of a panel. And she's like, well, it's about retold fairy tales and fairy tales from around the world. Do you want to join? And I'm like, sure, no problem. So I prepared and stuff like that, which put me on sort of the loop, as it were, for being involved in panels. And I've been doing them ever since, anywhere from 3 to 7, depending on the year and what they need and what they're showing.
Okay. So, well, that sounds like it was an exhausting but fun weekend.
It is.
I might have to check it out next year.
There's this one, and then there's another one, actually, which has got less cosplay and it's less family friendly. It's definitely more geared towards grown-ups, and that's BosCon, which is BOSKONE. I do not know why, and that's the long weekend in February.
Okay.
Yeah, they were originally one conference. They split. They had different ideologies.
Oh my.
Doesn't that sound serious?
Yes.
And it's too early for ideologies.
It's so funny, whether you go into the world of DC Comics or Marvel Comics or Doctor Who or science fiction or fantasy fiction.
There was actually a panel on Does Science Fiction Ignore Science?
No matter where you go in universe or any other alternative universe, there seems to always be the toxic word of politics.
Well, yeah. There's always disagreement, but what's nice is there's also, at least at this one and a lot of others, there's a lot of blending. So you get steampunk Batman and goth Wonder Womans and all sorts of combinations, and and more versions of R2-D2 and the TARDIS than you could begin to imagine. I mean, just created in so many different ways.
Kinds of creativity.
It's amazing.
So speaking about the different kinds of creativity and some crossover stuff, why don't you introduce today's guest?
I would love to, because our guest today is someone else I know from Broad Universe. Diana Sanchez is the not-so-secret identity of Janice Amanoff, whose superpower is cooking with small children. Did you guys get that? It means she cooks with them around, not that she puts them in the pot.
Are you sure?
No, but we'll
Have you asked her? Okay.
I mentioned it in passing, but I think we need to clarify. So that is, she does. She actually, I've had her cooking. It's really very good. She's an MIT alumna, a graduate of the 1995 Clarion Workshop and Odyssey Online, an active member of SCBWI, and a former editor at New Myths magazine. Aside from 18 years as a technical and science writer, she has taught science in the Boston Public Schools, developed curricula for STEM education, and taught Preschool Chef, which is a cooking class for children ages 3 to 5. So she put them in the pot like Mrs. Lovett. No. A Latina geek, originally from New Mexico. She now lives in Boston, the Boston area with her husband and 2 daughters, and her daughters contributed to our table today. Diana has published 1 novel, A Witch's Kitchen, from Dreaming Robot Press, which came out in September of 2016, and the sequel, A Pixie's Promise, is scheduled for release later this year in June. Her short fiction appears in the 2017 and 2018 Young Explorers Adventure Guides. So welcome, Diana.
Hi, nice to be here.
So what's your favorite way to cook children?
With chocolate.
Ah.
Oh, yes. No, actually, I had my children up at the stove scrambling eggs when they were about 3 years old. They both really love cooking. My older daughter is a little problematic in that she doesn't like to use recipes because she doesn't like to be told what to do.
Yeah.
So she makes cakes without a recipe, and sometimes they're marvelous and sometimes they're terrible. And most of the time they are edible.
Most of the time they're edible. Okay. So
Baking without a recipe. I can see cooking without, cooking without a recipe, but baking without a recipe, that seems to be asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Or hockey pucks.
Well, I think that if you get the basic of, you always want to throw in so much of the baking powder or so much of the baking soda, and there's just there's like a mathematical formula that if you check off the first 3 or 4 boxes, the rest is play.
Yep.
Okay.
It's
So-
true. The flavorings and how many eggs you add, those are all play. You can
okay.
really mess with things and see what happens.
Yeah, and whether you want to use ostrich eggs or whether you want to
Oh
use...
yeah. Actually, we use duck eggs sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Oh,
interesting.
yes,
No,
it's
why
fun.
duck eggs? Do you own ducks or do you have
I
nearby?
don't, but I have a meat share
Oh,
through
cool.
a local Massachusetts meat provider, and they sell duck eggs when we pick up our share, and they're larger and they're richer than chicken eggs.
That I would guess so.
Duck egg quiche is amazing.
Oh my.
Oh yes.
So there's some kitchen quackery.
I was about to say, maybe he really went there, guys.
He really did.
He really did. I know, there was no place else to go with that. You had to.
really
You had
do.
to.
Like-
Admit it, viewers, you would have been disappointed if he hadn't. Come on.
Come on.
But we do have a kitchen set up here. Maybe we should have Diana come back someday and cook with us.
Oh, that would be fun.
They could bring the girls.
Sure. I
Ooh, that would
actually
be fun.
have, because I do school visits, I have a selection of no-bake desserts that I can make. So I can just make it and then give it to them. We don't have to wait. So
I like not waiting.
I could make you monster balls.
Okay, moving right along.
You want to
Speaking
feel
of
them.
monsters, you also came to share with us today on today's show some dragons. That's another expression of your creativity. And we're going to get to your
The books too.
The
but-
books as
but-
well.
Hopefully.
But so tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, this is a very interesting. This is a moose dragon or an elf dragon?
I'm actually not sure. So that one I didn't do. My daughter collects dragon figurines, and she wanted me to bring a couple to come and play with your dragons.
Yay, play
I
date,
think
dragon
this
play
one
date.
is meant to be a Japanese Kirin, which is the Japanese equivalent of a unicorn, actually.
Oh,
So there's your unicorn.
It's a bicorn because he
Yes.
has 2 horns.
I think that's what it's meant to be, but I could be wrong.
Okay, so he's a bicorn, not to be confused with a bitcorn.
Bitcoin.
Which
Yeah,
is,
really.
some people think is another kind of fantasy, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And if anybody, if you're watching this on YouTube and you recognize that one, give us some comments down below
Please.
because it'd be interesting to hear more about that dragon.
And then we have on the other side of the table, I'm going to reach over because we're going to get to the middle in a minute.
Yes. I love the
Yes.
icy ones.
Ice dragon,
I love
which
those.
seems appropriate for this time of year.
Oh God, yeah, we're about to get snow again.
Yes, we are.
Oh.
Lucky us.
No, we're not.
I'm in denial. I'm
And apparently
I'm dressed
so is
like
my
it's
so is my
spring. I
co-host.
want it to be spring, but
Well, you are. You're wearing some lovely blue flowers and stuff, and
magical thinking.
magical thinking. Well, we are all about that. Between the fiction and the creativity, magical thinking is a big part of our lives. Let's face it, but it's a good thing.
So
The
yeah.
more of it, the better.
So we get to be a blue sandwich with
I
a
am.
opaque
I'm
filling.
the jelly. It's purple jelly. I'm the jelly in the blue sandwich.
There you go. And tell us about I love the story of the middle dragon.
Yes.
So the middle dragon is Humphrey the monitor dragon, which I made back in my starving college student days when monitors were actually wide enough for him to sit on. So he would
right.
sit on top of my monitor because I didn't have a cat, so I needed a dragon. No, when I was a student and poor, I used to paint figurines and give them to all of my friends and family members because that was much cheaper than actually buying presents. So
There you go.
that was one of my creative outlets when I was young and foolish.
We did a show in December on the power of using creativity as your Christmas gift.
Actually, my family has a tradition of making Christmas gifts. This is just within our nuclear family. We only give each other presents that we've made. And that is actually how I ended up writing A Witch's Kitchen. When my daughter was 6,
I like that.
she asked me to write her a story with fairies and unicorns in it for Christmas. And I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. Because at the time I was working on a hard science fiction YA novel that was completely impossible to write because every time I would write something, it took place in the solar system where basically the entire solar system is inhabited. Every rock that could have people on it does. And I'd start writing about
crowded
Pluto,
place.
and then this probe would go by and take pictures of Pluto, and everything was wrong, and I'd have to change it. And so I was very frustrated at that point. And she said this, and I said, okay, fine. Thinking, 10 pages. I'll have it done by Christmas, no problem. She asked me like the day after Thanksgiving. By Christmas, I had 3 chapters. And I realized that it was a novel, and I gave her an IOU saying, I'll have this to you by your birthday. And I did. I finished the novel by her birthday in March, and that's A Witch's Kitchen.
I love it. That's so great. Because we've said, you never know where creativity comes
Nope.
from.
Never
And you
know.
certainly weren't expecting to feel strong in is this considered middle grade or
It's a middle grade fantasy,
So
and it's not at all what I thought I would ever write, but it fell on my head quite literally, and there
big
it is.
bada boom?
A
Witch's Kitchen.
Now, I'm going to actually read the back cover here. And I'm afraid this is going to be a commentary on my reading because I read the back cover and I was like, oh, I don't want to read this. Millie's a witch, so why can't she do magic? Despite her mother's best efforts to teach her, every spell Millie tries goes horribly wrong, but she's a fabulous cook. When Millie conjures chocolate sauce instead of a transformation potion, her mother gives up and sends her to the Enchanted Forest School. Millie's initial delight in attending school rapidly fades as she struggles in the unfamiliar social environment, encountering fellow students of magical races, making new friends, and discovering that her mother's style of magic isn't the only one available.
I love
I
that.
love it.
On so many levels. One that, just from the parent point of view, because we both have kids, mine are a little older, but that our kids do create their own kind of magic, and it's not necessarily ours.
Absolutely not.
My oldest son is an athlete, and I look at him going,
Where did that come from?
and how I kind of know where it comes from. My husband's
Yeah.
athletic, and my brother is, but I do not understand the ability to put this information, and turn it into home runs. To me, that's as magical as putting together eggs and flour and sugar and turning them into a cupcake. And then, well, our viewers have actually met my son Max, and he's just living with a live-action cartoon character, most of the time.
Constant energy.
Oh my gosh! But also, his form of seeing the world and creating magic is different. Even though he's a creative, more similar to me, it's still different. So what did your daughter think of the book?
Oh, she loved it.
Oh, good.
So my older daughter loved it even more. So my younger daughter said there aren't enough unicorns in it. And
Everyone's
so
a critic.
for the sequel, she created a character that she insisted that I had to put in, and it's in there, and it's a half centaur, half unicorn. So she's a centacorn. Yes.
Centaur.
Is she accepted
Okay.
by other centaurs or
No.
unicorns? Ah, yes.
And that's part of the point.
Yeah.
And she's in this one or the
No,
next
she's
one?
in the next one. That's A Pixie's Promise.
Yes, we actually have a copy of the cover.
There we go.
We can show our
I can't actually show the book
viewers.
because it's not printed yet. I just turned it into the publisher right before Christmas.
Oh,
and
so
they
you have
came back to
time
me
to
saying,
read
so let's
this
move
one
up the
before."
production schedule, and we're going to put it out in June. And I was like, okay, everything I was going to do in March, I have to do now.
Yes, that's right. I saw your post. Anybody have any way to help with?
Yes.
But this is so cute, and I love her little acorn hat. And which I don't. Is she blowing magic? Is
Yes, she has pixie dust
Oh.
because she's a pixie,
Well,
so
that
that's her
makes
pixie
sense.
dust.
They didn't attempt to draw the centacorn on the cover.
No, well, the
But you know-
centacorn came later.
Oh, okay.
The cover was designed way before I even wrote the centacorn in.
Oh, okay.
So, but actually my daughter, my 10-year-old, made the original sketch for this cover, and we just sent it to the illustrator, and she came up with that.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that your daughter was a part of it in so many ways. What's the centacorn's name?
Lorelai.
Lorelai.
Lorelai the centacorn.
Okay.
We need to have somebody make you a little stuffed.
Yes. Oh,
Centacorn.
actually, my daughter loves doing doll makeovers where, she like
Oh, yeah, you,
shaves
like-
off all their hair.
and you take off all
and
the coloring
repaints them.
from-
Yes.
yeah.
She's completely obsessed with this. We have a doll that's been completely disassembled at home that I have to help her with this afternoon because she can't
Is it
quite manage
horrifying
the
looking
pliers.
in
At the moment, yes.
Oh.
But eventually it will be gorgeous and wonderful. I don't even know what she's doing with this one, but she could totally take a centaur doll and
Yeah.
turn it into Lorelai the centacorn.
Oh, that would be.
Well, I mean, you see, you kind of went, ooh, but this is a woman who cooks with children, so this is
Oh,
not
that's true.
gonna bother
That's
her.
true. The
They're made
half
from real Girl
the Frankendoll is absolutely completely goes with the rest of everything.
So, A Witch's Kitchen is technically geared for
8 to 12-year-olds.
8 to 12-year-olds.
So I was originally doing it for my then 6-year-old, but my kids read up. All kids read up, actually, but my kids are a little advanced readers. And the idea that I had for Witch's Kitchen is there are a lot of kids who start reading the Harry Potter books when they're 9, and they start just blowing through them, and then they get to the 4th book where really
Everything.
awful things start happening, and they're like, ah.
And there were only about 12. They're 11 or 12 by the time they hit that, probably.
So I wrote this for those kids who are advanced readers and who want intellectually stimulating books that aren't emotionally challenging. So this has a lot of advanced vocabulary in it. And no, I don't explain what it means. They have to go look it up. But it doesn't, but nobody dies. and most of the conflict is emotional rather than physical.
Oh,
So-
that's an interesting combination to really look at it and say, look, it is for an older reader, but I'm not going to hit you over the head with,
Yes.
emotional life lessons and
Exactly.
some of those things.
So does Millie end up with recipes she shares?
Actually, I have a cookbook on my website. If you go to dianasanchez.com and you look up A Witch's Kitchen, you'll see Millie's recipes. And it's a little recipe book that I put together myself with the help of my friend who took all the photographs. And it's almost all of the recipes that appear in the book, except for elf cakes because that requires magic.
Ah.
I've attempted cooking. I'm an adequate cook. I would say almost everything that comes out of my cooking kitchen requires a little more magic.
Well, realize that these are recipes that I chose specifically because they're things I think kids could do. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
yeah.
I got my first cookbook when I was 8 or 9.
I found
Yeah.
mine again. My mother had it for years in a box, and of all the things I've repurposed or just gotten rid of because I don't use it, that one I still have my original.
what a
I think it's
treasure.
Betty Crocker's.
Yeah, I had that book too.
And it's meant for kids, and one of the things in it is a giant cake that looks like a hamburger, and
Yep.
it's iced that way. But I kept that one, even though just because it's too precious to not have.
mine was, I think, a Scholastic book or something, and it was
That makes
really
sense.
to be very, you know, in my household, because I was the youngest of 3 boys, and all 3 of us learned how to cook, basically out of self-defense.
Oh, that's how my father learned to cook. His mother was a terrible, terrible.
And that's how my mother learned to cook.
Yeah, my father swore his mother would write a cookbook called How to Take 1,001 Cuts of Meat and have them all come out tasting the same.
Yeah. So you know, it was funny because my mother was the youngest of 6 kids, and she had 3 older sisters and a mother who loved to cook and bake and do everything. And it was just, she just didn't like doing it. So she would always do the shortest cut and most practical.
Yep.
And if she could buy it
Yep.
in a frozen dinner or a can, she would, because there was no joy in it for her, which is really interesting because she ended up with 3 boys who all at some point or another did cooking in their life.
Yeah.
You know, but I always say it was
That's a great thing, though.
Yeah.
My brother, I think because my father cooks, I know that's why my brother cooks. And when Ethan was little, he saw my father cook, and literally the biggest man he knew cooked. And he's like, well, then that's cool. And he
Yes.
started cooking young.
Yeah. So
And it is better to teach them how to, how to cook and how to deal with an oven than to spend,
How to use a knife appropriately.
than
Yes.
to either be trying to hide them, keep them from it, usher them out of the kitchen, which was my mother's mother. Nobody else could cook. So by the time when my mother got married, she knew nothing because my grandmother was always, they know everybody out. Shoot, I'm cooking. That was her thing. So
no, you got to pass on life skills.
Absolutely.
So, are there actually tips on how to cooking that Millie learns along the way in the book? Is there an educational component to
actually,
it? Per se?
in this one, she doesn't explain how to cook. She just kind of does it because she's
Okay.
always been doing it. In the second book, she passes on some of her skill to her friend Petunia, who is the title character.
see, I was
for
going to ask
Pixie's
if Millie
Promise.
appears in the next book.
So yes, that starts, and one of the characters suggests that she start up a cooking class for her friends so that they can also learn to cook.
When art imitates life.
Yes, yes. So that may happen.
Is Millie going to cook with children? Sorry, I'm back on
Oh!
that. Sorry.
And I let it go.
Bad host, no biscuit.
No monster balls for you.
Uh-oh.
I know how to
We
hit her
had to
where
come
she
back.
lives.
We had to come back to them. I'm just going
So-
to drown myself in my coffee now.
2018 Young Explorer Adventures Guide. Is this again something written for younger people?
Yes, it is, and it's actually unique in that this is a collection of science fiction short stories written for middle grades readers. So this is by the same publisher that published A Witch's Kitchen, and they specialize in science fiction and fantasy written for children. They aren't going to say that this is their main focus, but one of their major criteria is no romance. There should be no romantic entanglements here. This is for kids who are interested in science and interested in possibilities, but not quite ready for that yet. So the entire anthology is science fiction written for kids, and look around for it.
It's, yeah.
I dare you to find something else that has that wide array of science fiction for kids. It just doesn't
Especially not,
exist.
fantasy possibly, but definitely not science fiction.
Yeah,
So what did you
it's-
choose to write about for that one?
This one is My Mother the Ocean. It's told from the point of view of an alien child who has been sent by his planet as an ambassador to Earth, and his experience with culture shock when he arrives. And he befriends a human child and tries to explain the differences between his world and hers, some of which are very trivial and some of which are profound. And it's about him having to make a very adult choice when he's just a child. So, yeah.
It's a very dense looking book. I mean, that's
Well, there's a
huge.
lot of stuff in this. Look at how many authors are in this. So one of the wonderful things about this is that Nancy Kress puts a story in every Young Explorer's Adventure Guide. She's a very strong supporter of this, primarily because she found it so hard as a child to find science fiction
yeah. I
written for
mean,
her.
Nancy
And
is
in particular,
Hugo winning, I think, and
oh,
Nebula winning,
multiple
and-
Hugo winning.
Yeah.
She has something like 30 books out. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's,
and,
having written,
she
what I
was-
have, I know that
She was
that's,
one of my clarion instructors, actually.
Oh, neat.
And she was amazing, but also just very, you have got to, work every day and just very, very strict and structured.
which is how you get
so-
30 books out. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you
Oh,
do
yeah.
this as
Absolutely.
well.
And yet her stories are so whimsical and fun. I think the story in this is the great broccoli Wi-Fi theft. So
Okay.
That's now officially ranking on one of my favorite titles.
there you go.
The Great Broccoli
Wi-Fi theft. Yes.
Okay. Very interesting.
What's really funny is that's like a lot of things that kids either both love and hate.
Yep.
It's definitely, I mean, that's a title an 8 or 9-year-old is definitely going to want to,
Exactly.
totally going to want to read.
Exactly.
I love that.
So, have you returned to your world of frustration?
Your Pluto, your
Did I ever leave it?
We get that.
The YA novel that I was very frustrated with, I'm still not writing. I'll get there eventually. I feel like I need to learn a lot more about writing before I go there because it's going to need to be very carefully structured. It's a portal fantasy. And so she's going to be bound. Well, this is
So
the only way I
multiple
can get
worlds.
her to go to all of these different points of the solar system. And I also need to do a lot of sociology research because I want every world to have a different culture and a different society. Yes. So,
you just hit him right in the heart.
exactly. This is what I love
Right in the
about
heart.
fantasy and science fiction is that
I
you get
agree.
to experience cultures and places that you can't experience in real life.
Yeah, I've told this story on air, and that's why she's laughing before. But when I did my science fiction book, I wrote 100 pages of backstory before I even started because I was like, I had to
Yes.
have the races and the cultures and what were their political system, what was their religious system, what was their mating system,
What's
what
their
made them
food,
different.
obviously.
What is their
Food is
and,
gonna be-
and it's like
Yeah.
you write
Yes.
more that the reader never sees than what you actually put on paper.
So for the novel I'm currently working on, which is a very weird YA urban fantasy in which the protagonist gets lost in an infinitely large discount store, I actually wrote a Wikipedia entry, basically,
Yeah.
so that I can keep organized all the weird little things and how they interact with each other.
YA,
YA, young adult.
young adult. Okay.
Young adult.
Okay. Well, not
So
everybody
middle,
might be familiar
no,
with
this
that.
is true.
that-
So
I'm
that-
middle
sorry.
grade is
That's okay.
considered
8 to 12, basically
Yeah.
before you get to high school.
so middle, almost like middle school, and
Yeah.
then
Right.
young adult is going to be basically high school, sometimes into college. a bit.
Basically.
And then they've tried something called new adult, which
So new adult is sort of college.
Yeah, and right after college.
But realize that these are sort of meaningless
Yeah.
categories. I mean, that's what you're aiming for, but younger kids read YA and lots of adults read YA
I
and
read YA in
middle
middle
grades.
grade. I do. I love
I
it.
met someone at Aresia who said, I really like reading middle grade work because it's so much more fun.
There's not a simplicity necessarily, but I don't even think I have the right word. It's a different pace. It's a different way of
Exactly.
looking at the world. And as an adult, and we were talking about it always ends up in politics, and it always ends up in stress, or it always ends up in. And it's not that the middle grade world has. I mean, it's not that Millie has no stress or conflict. She does.
Oh, yes.
But it's nice to remember that younger version of stress, and when you had a different kind of hope
Yes.
and a different outlook on how it was solvable. I think that's a big part of it.
So, do you feel like you will, in the foreseeable future, stay in the middle school through high school audience? Is that
I
your
have-
sweet spot?
Well, I don't know. I've only written one book.
No, you've
find
written
out.
two.
Well,
One
you've
is
written two.
out.
Okay, I've written two. I've published one.
Yes.
I have plans for many more middle grade and YA novels, but I also have plans for adult novels, which
Okay.
I will be publishing as Ginny Samanoff.
Okay.
So that, I can keep my readerships a little separate. I don't want an 8-year-old who's read A Witch's Kitchen to read my
Oh,
ultimate
look,
parental
another-
angst novel.
You're really, oh, goody, another Diana Sanchez. Whoa.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of authors do this. Like Shannon McGuire
Yes, quite
is
a
also
few.
Mira Grant, and she publishes all of her, very intense zombie fiction as Mira Grant, so that the people who are used to her, light, frothy teenage romance, urban fairy
Yep.
books don't wander into them by mistake.
I love that idea of accidentally wandering into the wrong book.
My,
Oh,
my,
no, I don't need more ideas. Just
Sorry.
stop.
The muse, it strikes when you least expect it.
Yes.
No, I wrote fantasy fiction and science fiction under a pen name because I didn't want it confused with my spiritual new age,
Right, because that could
books.
easily get, people
Yeah.
assume, well, this
Yes.
is true, so this is true, or whatever.
As
yeah.
it is,
That
it's
makes perfect sense.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
it is, it's confusing because I have business books out and new age metaphysical books out under the same name.
Right.
And then I have a murder mystery that I'm working on,
fun.
a metaphysical murder mystery that, and I'm writing that under a third name because it's kind of a different genre.
Somebody asked me not long ago, how do you come up with, all your different characters? I'm like, have you met me? I am a whole bunch of different characters. It's really,
They're all around you. All
they
the
are,
time.
and they're within you. I mean,
Yes, all of that.
so is Millie a lot like your daughter?
Millie is a lot like both of my daughters in different ways, and she's also a lot like my mom, because my mom is a fabulous cook. My kids are good cooks for their age, but my mom is amazing. My sister is fantastic too. It kind of runs in the family, But she's also a little bit me.
Yeah.
She
I was
comes
gonna
from
say,
a
I
lot of
think
different places.
I was
I was
about to
gonna
say,
say,
yep. You
I
can
think
feel
we're
it.
talking to a little Millie. I think
Yes.
there's a little Millie at the table.
There is, yeah. And I think it's one of the reasons why, so many of us, don't, we cringe sometimes at film adaptations of books, not just because they've changed the book, but because when I read a book, most books, especially with a female heroine point of view, I find myself in them, and it's harder to find myself on the screen when it's somebody else's visual. It's easier for me to find myself in a book. Like I can find the aspects of me easier because it's my visuals.
Yes.
So it's the movie in my head as opposed to somebody else's. And I love movies, don't get me wrong, but I think it's one of the things I love about books.
Yeah, and and I have to put out here, and sometimes they just cast the wrong.
They've been rerunning the interview with the vampire on.
And that's exactly the one that I thought of.
Is it really?
I was sitting here thinking, like, I actually love Tom Cruise as an actor, but he was just.
Oh, they were
not
all so wrong.
He was just not Lestat. And
None of them were, and
Brad Pitt
wasn't Lewis, and
Kirsten Dunst.
Kirsten Dunst was actually fine.
I was
She
gonna
was the
say,
only one
she
that
was
was well
okay.
cast. It was as Armand.
Oh yeah.
I can't
so
remember
blanking out on
either.
his name.
I'm really bad with names.
I can picture him,
I can too.
Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
Antonio
yes.
Banderas was so not Armand. It was all wrong, other than Kirsten Dunst. Everything else is terribly cast.
I've always wanted them to redo. I love the Anne
redo
Rice
it.
series.
Yes.
And I would love them to do it with an appropriate casting instead of we're just going to take a best-selling author and sell and do top name Hollywood people,
Yeah.
whether they match it or not.
Or not.
Well, the landscape is so different now in genre film. And I think that they could probably find a director that would really do it justice. So I'm sure that
And be willing to
someone
take-
out there must be planning a remake. Someone.
They've got to, because she's got too many books to follow it that they could
Yeah.
make it a
Yeah,
multiple series if
and
they
the-
got it going.
Oh, easily.
And the following films, which completely different casting again, The Vampire Lestat and The Queen of the Damned, which used, I mean, none of them
They
were
did a
taken.
Vampire Lestat? I thought they
Yeah.
only did Queen of the Dam.
Oh, they didn't do Lestat?
No, they didn't.
How do you
it.
not
They-
do Lestat?
They skipped Lestat. They
You
only
know, they
did
made a
weird-
musical out of it.
No way.
It was called Lestat, and it didn't. I think it ran about 2.5 hours total, and that was it. I think it ran one performance.
So instead of every day a little, so they did they
Every
do
Day a
remake
Little
of Death?
Woo, that'd be fun. Yes, vampire books certainly could translate into musical theater. There's no two ways about it. Lots of drama, lots
yeah,
of conflict,
absolutely.
lots of
Hey,
romance and
if
intensity.
The fan
and-
of if the fan of the opera works, then
Absolutely.
absolutely it could work.
Well, I always wanted to see
But-
the vampire theater dance company that they had in the book.
That's right. Yeah.
I would love to see. I'd love to see
That's a brilliant idea.
a ballet decor of of the vampire.
Yeah.
But so, do you think Millie would ever have a on-screen image?
I don't know. Actually, I have been toying with a children's musical version of A Witch's Kitchen. I don't think I have the chops to do it, but it keeps popping into the back of my head. I have friends who are in theater, and my children love to act, and there's a serious paucity of theater, good theater, written for children. They've been doing things like adapting Dr. Seuss and the Phantom Toll Booth, but it would be really nice to see something that's
oh my
written.
God, the Disney musicals just have all been adapted, Junior. Oh,
Well,
you
the
could go crazy.
challenge is you want to do this as a school play,
Right.
which means that you need lots of roles.
Right.
And you want, ideally, every child to have one brief shining moment so their parents can take pictures, and that's tough. But I realized that A Witch's Kitchen, with the school scenes, there are a bazillion kids, and they can all just come in costume. The kid who loves to dress up as a fairy, and the kid who loves to dress up as a
this
goblin.
probably really does have
You understand? You
possibilities.
could just pull out all of the Halloween costumes and let them go.
We need to introduce her to the Dunstable Theater.
Yeah. Well, who we can never get on the show. But it's so funny and this is my creative, like, always
Here it goes.
pinging off.
It's all, yeah, I can hear the gears going over here because
Yes.
I'm closer.
Because I'm already writing a song for chocolate sauce.
Oh, well, that's like the first chapter. It's the chocolate sauce.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm already
man.
writing a
Well,
song
and that would
in my
make
head
sense
for
too,
chocolate
because
sauce.
her wish song would probably be, you have your opening number, and then your hero heroine has their I wish song. And
Yep.
since Millie wants to actually be a witch like her mother and not make chocolate sauce, it would probably definitely.
Actually, the wish that she makes in the first chapter is, I wish I could just be a cook. I wish Mom
There's
would
the
let
chocolate
me
sauce, yep.
give up the magic and
And
just
just-
be a cook.
See, and I'm sitting over here writing the song in my head.
All right, there we go.
Tune in next year when we present Witch's Kitchen, the musical.
Well, I did that once with somebody that you and I both know, which is they weren't sure whether they were going to go for a movie or a musical. And they had a book, and they were going back and forth. You know who I'm talking about.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. And he's sitting there, and he's talking about, if they did it as a show and whatever. And I sat there, and I just got what the first act closing number would be. And I started describing what I could see, because it was the following of the lead character from his childhood up, and having the closing number, because I had the 3 different ages coming together, and the first one was the kid on the tricycle started the song, and the next one was the young man coming in and picking up the refrain of the song, and then there was the character as current day. So you had the 3 different people singing this song about their father and their different experiences with their father. And I ended up writing the song for him. I wrote it, and I got it all noted, and it was like this, and then the musical never went anywhere. So I sat there with this song that was perfectly, but I was like,
Yeah,
So
welcome to the
sad.
life of, that's theater.
but the life of the creative also.
It is. We do.
which
We have a lot of ingredients hanging out a lot. You said, I've got this idea and I've got this idea. And did I ever
yeah.
really stop doing this?
The one play I ever wrote was an adaptation of 4 Ursula Go short stories. And it was so much fun to write. And it's never going to be produced because I talked to Le Guin, and it's a copyright nightmare.
Oh, God,
4
I can only
different,
imagine.
with excerpts from a couple of her novels. And she's just like, there's just no way. We cannot do copyright on this play. It's impossible. So sad, but it was really fun to write.
Oh, there you go. And there are times we do that. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons, people do fan fiction, and rarely is that ever going. If you stay in the copyrighted universe, you're never going to see it. But we do. We
Yeah.
create from things we've already read and written, and we do have a lot of pieces. You can't quite quilt them together. You can't take the song from this one and the poem from that one necessarily and make one big creative piece. But it is amazing how many scattered.
Yep.
starts and stops and even completed, because that song is completed and that play is
That
completed.
play is completed. It could be put on right now, but it never will
But
be.
the team of lawyers would be on hand to.
One of these days, I'll get a bunch of friends together and we'll just do a play reading, and that'll be fun.
That would be fun.
I did that with a script that I wrote with somebody. They had brought me they had brought me and said, I really want this to be a movie script. And at first I said, I just want your opinion. I don't want you to put your creative fingers on it. Just tell me what you think. And I said, okay, I can do that. So I told them what I think. And
You have to sit on your creative fingers.
Came back, and then they came back and they said, so now I want your creative fingers. Could you help me a little bit with writing it? And I was like, sure. And I said, so how many? So he's, and he was like, I need like 90 to 100 pages of script for the movie. And I said, yeah. And I said, okay, so what have you got? And he goes, 12. And I said,
man.
So I got it up to the 100 from there. But we
good.
did a play reading for it and trying to do it, and that was a lot of
Nice.
fun.
Yeah.
Kind of doing that. Make America Read Again. Is that just an odd button, or does that actually belong to something?
Actually, it belongs to my older daughter. I stole it from her.
I like it.
I like it too.
Okay.
I have one that says reading is magic. That's how I
Oh, that's nice.
It isn't associated with anything per se. It's
Oh, sure
just
it is. Come on, it's a political statement.
Well, I know it's a political statement, but I mean, is there an organization out there called Make America Read Again?
It's just a really cool button. That's all.
And your daughter, you got it from is what? How old?
13.
13, and
But she was 12 when she got it.
and
Yes.
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 Now that's cool.
Yes. No, she's very active. She went with me on the Women's March and had a blast. My younger daughter was terrified and didn't want anything to do with it. But yeah, my 13-year-old is like, we must change everything. It's all horrible. And I'm like, okay, but realize that change takes time. And, you have to be patient. And we just keep working on it until things get better.
Not unlike writing.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, this is going to be a year of change, and I'm going to take a second to
I sure
to
hope
plug.
so.
I'm going to go ahead and take a
I
second
was
to
going to
plug.
actually suggest it, yeah.
Yeah. We just did, because I have another show called Web of Light, which is for people and organizations and ideas that are weaving a web of light in the world. And we just taped a 2-part, the numerology and astrology for 2018. Ooh. So that 2-part show will be releasing, I believe, this week on the TV station, the first part and then the second part, and then it will be on the my YouTube channel, which is my Dr. Kevin, MYDRKEVIN, where after it's on air, I also house Dragons and Unicorns, and as well as Web of Light. And it talks about that this is going to be a huge year of change, and that February is going to be, a lot of people are going to be going, what's my place in the world? I've got to figure out my place in the world, and this world has become something that I don't fit in. What's my place in the world? And then March is going to be about starting to go out there and challenge the world that's no longer working.
For spring. How
And, yeah.
appropriate.
That is so funny, because I decided back in December that I was going to take the entire month of February off and reorganize my life, both physically and mentally and spiritually, because the whole author thing was a life change that I wasn't expecting. I was kind of hoping for, but it still nonetheless kind of fell on my head, and I wasn't at all prepared for it.
And now you have a second book coming out in June.
And now I have a second book coming out. It's like, okay, this is actually my profession now. I need to start taking it seriously. I need to start reorganizing my life around it, and also finding a balance between that writing life and home life, and political life and community life is something that I'd like to do consciously rather than just running around picking up balls that I've dropped on the floor.
Yep.
I would like to learn to juggle now.
There you go. Apparently February, that's interesting.
Yes,
there we
the
go.
month of February is my time of introspection, and the month of March is going to be my time of action. So
Yeah.
your prediction
in
is
line.
right on the money.
Or your alignment with the...
Yeah.
And then the month of April is actually going to be a month where, we then recheck in with our communities and our support systems to make sure that we all have realigned and are working together.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, we do a month by month.
I like
we
that.
do
I'm gonna have
Yeah.
Check that out.
So you want to check that out. Diana Sanchez, we want to thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you.
You have, you were a former science teacher, which I find
Yes.
interesting since you're writing science fiction as part of what you're doing. Witch's Kitchen is a young adult novel.
Middle grade.
Middle grade, but would you classify it fantasy? Would you classify
It's definitely fantasy.
Fantasy.
It has almost no science fiction element to it.
No, okay.
Almost.
Oh, okay.
She may have snuck some in there.
I'm a recovering physicist, so there has to be some science in there somewhere.
There
Hi,
you go.
Diana.
There you go. And coming out this spring will be A Pixie's Promise by Diana Sanchez, which is a follow-up to A Witch's Kitchen. If you have a young reader in your household that would like to have a little bit of challenge, a little bit of amusement, and maybe one or two very subtle life lessons thrown in the process, then you may want to check out Diana Sanchez. Namaste.